Okay, the recording has been started. I know you're all just hoping I'll forget, but all right. Today, your grades were posted to Moodle. Today, we're going to stop at 3, so I'll pass out your exams, and you can see what you missed and ask any questions you have. Also, I looked over the grades, and I looked at the questions that were missed, especially by the people who did really well. And I decided that you can add 7 points to your grade in Moodle. So the grade in Moodle is your grade before those points. So I don't know that I'm going to change the Moodle grade, but I will add those points before I do any calculating of your averages. Okay. And remember that, if you didn't do well, I do give a makeup at the end of the semester over the first 3 exams, and that can replace your grade on the first exam. So don't despair if you didn't do well. All right. That's a really good question. The projector here is not working yet, so there'll be a momentary delay. These projectors are very picky. I don't know why I did that. Okay. Chapter 8 is really another application of Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, the basic supply and demand model. It's not really anything fundamentally new. It's just extending the model to look at other situations. And if you recall, when in the last chapter, when we started it, I said that was a chapter that I really, really liked. And this is also a chapter that I really, really like, because one of the best ways to understand the importance of something is to take it away, and see what happens. My church, we have we're in a building where there's another entity in the building next to us, and we have a common wall. And on one of the walls in a closet, there's this board of all kinds of electronic circuits. We had no idea what those circuits were for. I didn't think about it. I just left it. But our other elder he's an engineer. He didn't see any reason for it, so he unplugged it. Nothing happened. A week later, somebody comes and says from the business next door, have y'all had any electrical problems? We've had electrical problems for a week and they can't figure out what the problem was. And we said, well, we got all these circuits, you want to look at them? And they came and looked at it and said, please don't unplug that again. That's really, really important. We've been without power for a week. Who knew that those circuits were doing something very, very important? We didn't see any reason for them, so we unplugged it. And it caused a lot of problems. And so now, we put something in front of it so that no one will ever do that again. We appreciate the importance of those circuits in that plug. And the same thing is true with prices. The price system works so well that you don't even think about it. It does its job without you realizing what it's doing. But when the government imposes some kind of price control, then prices can't do their job anymore. And suddenly, all these terrible things happen, which economists could have told the government, that's what's going to happen. But people don't see it. And it happens year after year, decade after decade. And some of the price control policies we'll talk about have literally been in place for decades. They've been having the same effect for decades, and yet they continue to be used. We'll talk about rent control a little bit later on. And I have to tell you two stories, just to get your interest. You wouldn't think that an economic policy could lead to someone being murdered. You just wouldn't think that. Okay? It happened. I have the article from the New York Times where a landlord admitted he hired a hitman to kill two of his tenants. It wasn't that he didn't like them, it's that they wouldn't move out. And he couldn't raise his rent until they moved out. Now, normally, the landlord wants the tenant to stay because he's getting money from them. But because of the rent control in New York City, he was given an incentive, or he had an incentive, to want them to leave. And they wouldn't leave, and they wouldn't leave. So he hired someone to kill them. When you mess with the price mechanism, the consequences are bad. And often they can be far worse than you would have anticipated that they would be. Another thing we'll talk about toward the end of this chapter, anybody have an idea? Underground, under Springfield, Missouri, there is a giant cave. A giant cave. And there's something in it that weighs 1.4 billion pounds. Now, what do you think the government would be stockpiling?
Nuclear waste.
You would think, well, maybe that's nuclear waste. They're trying to put it somewhere where it's out of the way. Something that we would need during time of war, maybe. Those would be the things that come to mind. What we're going to find is that underneath Springfield, Missouri, and in lots of places around the country, there are refrigerated caves that have a total of 1.4 billion pounds of cheese. The government is paying for the cheese, then they're paying for the storage space, then they're paying to refrigerate it. Does this sound like a good idea? why would they have to do that? Well, we're going to see there's a very, very simple answer to why this is happening.
That sounds like some New Deal shit.
It does, yeah. The New Deal was kind of the, as far as I know, the beginning of a distrust of prices and the idea that the government can do whatever they want with prices and it'll be okay. And we're going to see some examples of how, no, that's not really true. So just a few introductory ideas. When we talk about price controls, right, we're talking about laws that make it illegal for prices to move above a maximum price or below a minimum price. So the ceiling is where you have a maximum legal price for something, and a floor is where you have a minimum legal price. Okay? Basic idea is the government has looked at the equilibrium price and they've decided they don't think that's the right price. So they want to move the price to a different level. And if you've been following what we've said so far, prices communicate signals, or prices are signals. They communicate information, they create incentives. They enable us to get an allocation of resources that is efficient, where the gains from trade are at a maximum. That's what the price mechanism does. When you have price controls, the government is saying, we're not going to let the price mechanism work. The government is saying, we think we know better what the price of things should be than does the market. These controls interfere with market signals. Okay? Remember, what kind of signals are these prices? They're signals as to the value of resources. If you don't have prices to tell you what things are worth, how do you know? And we've talked about how prices link markets. In the market for ethanol is linked to the market for candy bars and the market for gasoline. When you impose controls, that link is broken. So you don't have adjustments between them. We said that prices link geographically. If something is you have a terrible shortage in one area and a lot in another area, well, the price will be high in one and low in the other, and you'll have resources moving from the area where they're not highly valued to the area where they are highly valued. When you don't let markets provide those signals, then those linkages are broken. And the areas where they really, really value getting more, they have no way to communicate that to the other areas. But as I said, price ceiling is a maximum legal price. And ceilings have a number of important effects. The easiest one is to show is shortages. And we'll be going through each one of these, but I'll just mention these first. Also, reductions in product quality. When the government says to a producer, you can't charge more than a certain amount, you should expect that the quality of that product is going to go down. Okay? Wasteful lines and other surge costs. Back in the 70s, when we had the OPEC oil embargo and the government imposed price controls on gasoline, sometimes people would have to wait in line for a mile or 2 miles to get gasoline. So you have to think about, if you're thinking, is this good for consumers? Well, they were paying a lower price for the gasoline, but think about the opportunity cost of waiting in line for an hour or two, what you could be doing with your time rather than sitting in line waiting. Also, we're going to see there's a loss of gains from trade. Okay? You let the price mechanism work, gains from trade are maximized. we're going to see very clearly when you don't let it work, then the gains from trade will be reduced, which means people are worse off. It's not, when we talk about ceilings and floors, it's not a question of do we want to help consumers or do we want to help producers? Okay? They hurt everybody. They hurt everybody. And gives us a misallocation of resources. We would like resources to go to the people who value them the most. And when you let the price mechanism work, that's what happens. If I may have given the example earlier, if you're a big football fan and you find a free ticket to the Super Bowl, then you can go see the Super Bowl. But if somebody offers you $1,000 for it, okay, then you have to decide who values this more, me or the other guy. If it were me who had the ticket, I'd say, I'd probably be willing to pay $30 to go see the Super Bowl. So if I find the ticket, somebody else offers me $1,000, the ticket is going to go to the other guy because he values it the most.
That's a $970 consumer surplus.
That's right, $970 consumer surplus, and the guy who's buying it, he's going to benefit as well. And why are we getting that gain? It's not because I'm especially interested in helping the other guy. It's because I'm thinking this is good for me. I can buy a new computer with this $1,000. But you impose the ceiling, then that guy can't offer $1,000. So maybe he can only offer $25. So I say, no, I'll watch the game. He says, but it's really worth more to me. And I say, well, I don't care. You're only offering me $25. It's worth $30 to me, so I'm going to use the ticket. And he's frustrated because he's thinking, I'm willing to pay you $1,000. He would be better off if he was allowed to offer me $1,000. But the government, a third party, you say, no, that wouldn't be fair. You can't do that. So the result is that the person who doesn't value it as much ends up using it. That doesn't happen when you let the price mechanism function. Okay, so those are the things we will see effects of ceilings. Now let's look at the first, shortages. And people often make mistakes with dealing with just basic supply and demand analysis. That's why it's so important. Draw the graph, work through it very carefully so you don't make mistakes. When the price ceiling is below the market price, then we get quantity demanded greater than quantity supplied. At that price, consumers want more than producers are willing to provide, which is the definition of a shortage. Shortage is measured by the difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied at the controlled price. The lower the control price is relative to the equilibrium, the larger the shortage is going to be. And we see that here. If we let the price go to the equilibrium level, then the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded are going to be equal. No shortage, no surplus. We have a balance. The gains from trade, which would be the area below the demand curve, above the supply curve, so it'd be all of this area, will be maximized if we let the price go to the equilibrium level. If the government says, no, that price is too high, we want, let's put a number in here. Let's say, say the equilibrium price is $5. If the government says, no, that's not fair, the price should be $2. Then the consumer, if he's not thinking very far, says, this is great. I only have to pay $2 rather than $5. I'm going to be better off. But we have to think through, what are the consequences that are going to result? And we just use the model. We say, well, if the control price, the ceiling is $2, that means it's illegal to charge more than $2. So the price will be $2. And then we ask, what will consumers want to do, or what will producers want to do? And we get the answers to those by reading over to the supply curve, reading down, reading over to the demand curve, and reading down. And we see that at the low price, because gas is cheap, that's sending a signal to consumers. Gas isn't very valuable. You can use a lot of it. And so they want to. Let's say quantity demanded is 200,000 in a particular area. And it sends the signal to producers. People don't value this very much. You don't need to produce a lot of it. And so they produce only here. That's quantity supply. Let's say that's 100,000. And just think through the meaning of the graph and really talk through the graph, because that's how you learn to use these things correctly. At the control price, consumers want to buy 200,000 gallons. Consumers line up to buy that much. Producers only have 100,000 gallons. So the amount of the shortage is the horizontal difference between the two, which is 100,000. Think about what that means. It means you've got consumers who have the money. They say, I want to buy gas, but there is no gas available. So they're at gas stations that have no gas. They don't get any gas. If this was a free market, no problem, because the price would adjust. As soon as the producers realized that there was going to be a shortage, what would they do? They would raise the price, because they would know, I can charge more per unit, so I'll get more per unit, and I'll still be able to sell as much as I want to sell. So the producers will definitely make more profit if they raise the price. So the producers have an incentive to raise the price, and the consumers have an incentive to raise the price. Now that may seem strange, but imagine you're at the end of a 2-mile long line to get gas, and you're thinking, they're going to run out before I get to the front. I'm not going to get any gas. You have an incentive to go to the gas station and say, look, I'll pay you $3 a gallon. I'll pay you $4 a gallon. Give me some gas. Put me ahead of all these people. Okay? Basically, you're competing against the other people who are in line. And that's what we do normally in a market economy. You compete on the basis of price. But when you have a price ceiling, you still have competition. You just don't get to compete on the basis of price. And so you end up with a shortage, you end up with long lines. The real cost of the product goes way up, because you have to pay $2 per gallon, plus you have to sit in line for 2 or 3 hours and give up all the other things that you could be doing. I mean, it's just, the effects are just so clear, and yet we continue to have price controls year after year after year. It's very frustrating to economists. All right, self-check. Price ceilings create shortages because when the controlled price is lower than the market price, what do we have?
Quantity demanded is greater than what's being supplied.
Quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. And the reason is because everybody is responding to prices. But when you have a price control, prices are sending the wrong information. They're encouraged, and they're creating the wrong incentives. They're encouraging consumers, consume what? They're encouraging producers, don't produce very much. And so you get a shortage. That's the predictable result. Nobody wants that, but the politicians who put the controls into effect, they benefit politically because voters look at them and they say, oh, they're keeping the price down. They're protecting us. Voters don't generally blame the politician for the shortage. Usually the producers are the ones who get blamed for the shortages. So people see the shortages, they just don't see what the cause of the shortages is. And so it continues, decade, actually century after century, because we have examples from the ancient past of price controls and effects that they had. Okay, second effect of price ceilings, reductions in quality. At the control price, sellers find there is an excess of demand. That means at the control price, there are customers who want to buy more than is available. Producers would like to raise the price, but they're not allowed to. So what can the producer do in order to make more profit?
Selling lower quality.
He can cut the quality of the product. And the book gives some really interesting examples in, I think it's the 70s, when like newsprint, they in the 1971, Richard Nixon imposed comprehensive wage and price controls on the whole economy. And so we had all kinds of problems. It wasn't just problems with gasoline, it's all over the place. So that the one example, the price of newsprint, which was used to make newspapers, was kept down. So there was a shortage of newsprint. And the price of newspapers was kept down. Well, what can the newspaper do so that they can reduce their costs, so that they can survive with the reduced amount of newsprint? Well, they started printing with smaller fonts. So you had the same print, same amount of information, but the words were smaller. That reduced their cost. It was probably a relatively effective way to do that, but that's definitely a reduction in quality from the perspective of the consumer, because presumably the newspapers had chosen the size font that consumers wanted. And now consumers are getting font that is smaller. It's going to be harder to read. Producers wouldn't do that, but because of the controls, they had an incentive. When you have a price ceiling or a floor, it changes incentives. And so people change their behavior. Another way quality can fall is with reductions in service. If you have a store that provides, is selling a product, you go into the store, they have salespeople who explain how the product works, they demonstrate it, and they give you all this help. If you keep the price down below the equilibrium level, then the producer has an incentive to try to cut cost. And one way is don't provide the extra service, don't provide the demonstrations. In the extreme case, a company can say, you go in, you say, I'd like to see such and such a brand, and they say, okay, well, we don't have that, but we'll order it for you. They can reduce their cost if they don't keep it in inventory. Well, that's a real pain if you have to wait for them to order it. Why would they do that? Well, they didn't when they could raise their price, but when they can't raise their price, they will look for ways to deal with the problem. Reductions in quality. We'll talk more about rent control later, but that's a huge example of how quality goes down. When I was in graduate school, I lived in Santa Monica, California, which had rent control. And it was very hard to find an apartment, and the quality definitely went down. And it was very hard to find an apartment as well. This was an interesting example. Again, in the 70s, one of the union leaders complained that the number of matzo balls in his favorite soup had been reduced from 4 to 3. Okay? So the government is saying you can only charge this much for soup. So what do the producers do? They say, okay, we'll charge that much, but we won't give you as much. So in effect, they're raising the price. Legally, they could get away with that. And that happened in all kinds of ways. Candy bars got smaller. You know, they couldn't change the price. They were forced to lower the price, so they cut the size of the candy bar. You got to keep in mind that when the government imposes a ceiling, producers are very smart, and they have an incentive to figure out how do we get around this control, and they will find ways to get around these things.
So the black market, in effect, becomes the market.
Yeah, well, what is the black market?
It's the operating standard market that is against the law.
Well, yeah, it's a black market. When you have price controls, a black market is a market for products that the product isn't illegal necessarily, but it's the price. They sell at prices that are illegal. And so, yeah, if when you have price ceilings, you create an incentive for a black market to develop, because people can't get what they want at the control price. So you have producers who say, hey, you really want this, I can get it for you. And if you do that, then you're becoming a part of the black market. And that has all kinds of effects, because when you have a growing black market, then that tends to corrupt the legal system, corrupt the police. And so you get horrible consequences because of ceilings. The controls make it a higher price illegal, but there are other ways to pay. You can bribe the producer. Okay? It may be the control price is $2, but you say, I'll give you 3, I'll give you 4. Okay? We would tend to think, well, you're breaking the rules, so that's illegal. That's definitely illegal. We tend to think, well, if it's illegal, it's immoral. That's bad. You shouldn't be doing that. But in terms of efficiency, if people are bribing the producers, then you're getting around the price controls and you're reducing the inefficiency of the price controls. So if you had a price control where it was very easy to bribe the producers, we would say, well, that's going to give you a more efficient outcome than if people don't bribe. But then you have the moral issue, well, people are breaking the law. And once you start breaking one law, it's easy to start breaking other laws, and that can lead to worse problems. Okay, here, let's see. This is again looking at the ceilings. And notice what's been added here. Here we've got, let's say the equilibrium price would be $2. But apparently the government decided, no, that's too high, so they are imposing a ceiling of $1. It creates the shortage here of that amount. What this rectangle, what does that represent? And don't just read the words there, Jimmy.
And it looks kind of like how a tax plays on the supply and demand.
There are similarities. Think in terms of producer surplus and consumer surplus. If we did not have any controls, then where would the consumer surplus be?
Be a whole lot lower on
On the-
the ground.
Okay, in this same market, but without the control, where would the consumer surplus be? Which area?
Be at the top.
Uh,
Or it'd be under the demand line.
It would be under the demand curve and above the price line. Okay? That would be the net gain going to, or the total gain going to consumers if the price were $2. With the ceiling, okay, the consumer surplus, they're paying, here we're told that for this last unit, they're willing to pay $3. Okay. They only have to pay $1. Okay. So there is, for a consumer who's willing to pay $3 and only has to pay $1, if they actually get the gas, then they would get all of this area. That would be consumer surplus. The problem is there's a shortage. So if there's a shortage, you got to compete to get it. So how do you compete?
Offer them something.
Hmm?
Offer the.
Could be offering a bribe, but if they don't offer bribes, okay, then the typical way people compete is by waiting in line. Okay? So with a control price of $1, the price they pay is going to be here. They will get this huge gain if they can get the gas. So the value of that surplus they're getting is large. And so they're going to be willing to wait in line for a long time. They're going to compete by waiting in line. Okay? And so rather than that being a surplus, a gain to them, they're having to compete with each other. And so this area will tend to be wasted, okay? Because they're competing through waiting in line, and that's not productive. If you're competing by offering a higher price, right, well, that's not using up any resources. But if you have to compete by waiting in line for, a day or two, that is very costly. I remember, again, when I was in school, UCLA had a very, very good basketball team. And everybody wanted to go to UCLA games. And they wanted to help out students. So the price of a basketball ticket was $1. That was below the equilibrium price. And so when the tickets went on sale, there would already be people waiting in line. They would wait in line for days. They would camp out. Okay? Rather than studying and going to class, they were competing to try to get those tickets. That was very, very wasteful. And that's the way things tend to work with price controls. Okay, loss gains from trade. As long as the price consumers are willing to pay is greater than the price sellers are willing to accept, there are mutually profitable trades that can be made. With price controls, some profitable trades will not be made. That's what your book calls unexploited gains from trade. When you have a trade that's where it's worth more to the consumer than it costs the producer to produce it, but the trade doesn't occur, then there was a gain from trade that could have been received by someone, but nobody gets it because of the control. And that creates a deadweight loss, which we will see in just a second. Deadweight loss, we've talked about that before. That's the inefficiency that is caused by some type of market distortion or inefficiency. We said that with a tax or with a subsidy, it creates a dead weight loss. Here we're seeing that with price controls, also it will produce the same kind of problem. And the reason is because people are making decisions based on the wrong information. They're looking at the prices, but the prices are not sending the right message. And how do we fix that? We let the price go to the equilibrium level. But how do you get politicians to not interfere? Okay? That has always been the problem.
I would say push them out of the helicopter, but that's the wrong incentive and the wrong incentive capacity.
Yeah, pushing them out of the helicopter, that would definitely create an incentive. But you really, you have to think to get politicians to act in an efficient way. You really do have to think outside of the box. I'm not suggesting we should push them out of helicopter, but back in the 80s, when we were having, just gotten through the big problem with inflation. The question was, how do we get the Federal Reserve to have the right incentives to keep inflation down? And I remember one proposal was we should just have a rule, constitutional rule. If inflation goes above a certain level, one member of the Open Market Committee will be shot. Now, morally, most of us would think that's probably not a good idea, but it would have the effect of creating incentives. And so if you can think of something that's morally acceptable, that has the same effect, that can be helpful. Okay, again, here we see, same graph, the control price is $1. For the quantity that is going to be supplied, consumers are willing to pay on the margin $3. Okay. What does the area A represent?
It's the dead weight on the consumer side.
It's going to be the dead weight loss on the consumer side due to, well, it's going to be a part of it, due to the price control. But also look at it as on, let's say these are 150,000 units, 100,000 is going to be supplied. On those last 50,000 units, consumers are willing to pay this entire area under the demand curve. If we had no price control, they would only have to pay this price. So they'd be willing to pay all of this. They would have to pay this area. So A represents the consumer surplus that consumers would get on the last 50,000 units if we were in equilibrium. In other words, if we had no price control, then there would be a gain to consumers represented by that area A. On the producer side, what does B represent?
It's the dead weight loss in the production.
The dead weight loss on the producer side, because it represents the producer surplus that producers would have gotten, the gains from trade producers would have received if they could produce the extra 50,000 units. Right? Because on those last 50,000, the amount they would get, the dollars they would get, would be the area of this rectangle. The minimum amount they would have been willing to accept, which is the cost to the producers, would be the area under the supply curve over those units. So they're willing to accept the area under the supply curve between 100 and 150. They would actually receive all of this, so the net gain they would get would be B. Okay? A and B represent the gains from trade which society enjoys if those last 50,000 units get produced. But if we have a price ceiling, then the price is here. Producers are not willing to produce 150,000. They're willing to produce only this. And so we lose the gains from trade represented by A and B. That's the inefficiency or the deadweight loss created by the price control. Now the consumers, they're not looking at the graph. They're not thinking through all of the effects. The consumers are thinking, well, I'm having to wait a long time to get the gas and I can't get as much as I want, but at least I'm able to buy some at a low price. So the consumers are thinking the controls help them. The consumers don't realize, in many cases, that if the price were allowed to go up, they wouldn't have to wait in line and they would be able to get a lot more gas. Okay? The usefulness of the graph is that it makes it very clear that this is about efficiency. When you impose a price control, it creates inefficiency. It's not helping the consumers at the expense of the producers. It's hurting the consumers, and it's hurting the producers, and it's hurting the whole economy because we're using our resources a lot less efficiently than we otherwise would. Okay? Just remember, if you have an equilibrium, if you let the price go to the equilibrium level, then the price is communicating the right information about the value of resources. And that means that people make their decisions based on the right information. Both the consumers and the producers are using the right valuations. If you impose a ceiling or a floor, then consumers and producers are responding to the wrong information, to the wrong incentives, and you get an inefficient use of output or use of resources. All right, misallocation of resources. We've kind of already said this. When you have controls, resources do not flow to their highest valued uses. I value the Super Bowl ticket at only $30. The other guy values it at $1,000, but I'm going to use it if the price is kept down at $25. It's a simple example, but that's what happens throughout the whole economy. It's not just two people and Super Bowl ticket. It has to do with every resource and every person throughout the whole economy. And they give a really good example with heating oil. If you have a really cold winter in the east, the northeast, well, then the demand for heating oil is going to go up, and that's going to push up the equilibrium price there. And in the, say, Los Angeles on the West Coast, they're not going to be using a lot of oil for heating, but they do use oil for other things like heating their swimming pools. Okay? Well, if you have an extreme shortage on the East Coast, people can't heat their homes. They're freezing. Right? If you let the price go up, then people on the East Coast are going to have to pay more. And what happens on the West Coast?
I see that signal and think, I need to bring in heating oil.
That's right. The producers on the West Coast say, hey, we're only getting $20 per unit now, but if we take this to the East Coast, we'll get $40. So the price, producers on the West Coast would ship more oil to the East Coast where it's highly valued. And it happens because producers see the difference in prices, and the prices will adjust. But if the government says, oh no, that's not fair, we're going to keep the prices down, then the people in Los Angeles who are heating their swimming pools, which is not, we would generally think that's not as important as somebody heating their home and not freezing to death. People in Los Angeles are going to watch the news. They see the people in the East freezing, and they say, that's just terrible. But they have an incentive to keep heating their swimming pool because the price hasn't gone up. You let the price go up, when they see their heating bills going up, they cut back, they don't heat it in the winter, and there's more available for people in the East who are having trouble heating their homes. Oops. Okay, and this is really just kind of summarizing what we've already said. Under price ceiling, resources are misallocated because price can't signal that there is a shortage. In a free market, you got a shortage, price goes up. Everybody finds out about it. If you have a ceiling, then the price can't go up. It can't signal there's a shortage, and it can't create an incentive for producers to produce more, and it can't create a signal for consumers to use less. Okay, we're almost out of time. Let's see. Shortages in one market create breakdowns and shortages in other markets. Remember how we said markets are linked. When there's a disruption in one market, prices will adjust and resources will adjust. But if you impose controls in one market, then there is no, that adjustment that would have taken place doesn't happen. The effect of price controls expands into markets without price controls. I remember reading of this was back in the 70s, of a business that had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a computer system. This is kind of back with mainframes, and they were very expensive. And they called the producer, and they said, we've got a problem, such and such a part, it was kind of a minor part, has gone out, we need a replacement. And the response was, oh, we're sorry, we don't produce that anymore. It's like, we spent $100,000 on this computer. It's worthless if we can't get a replacement for it. We'll pay you what you want. We've got to get a replacement. But the response was, well, our cost of producing this part have gone up, but the government's not letting us raise the price we can sell it at. So it's no longer profitable to produce this product, so we don't produce it anymore. So the end result was the company that had spent thousands of dollars on a computer system, it was worthless. Without the controls, there'd have been no problem. It would have been easy to motivate the producer to produce that replacement. But when you change prices and basically impose arbitrary prices, impose prices just based on what the government thinks is a good price, it's going to cause the effects to spread throughout the whole economy. Shortages of steel drilling equipment made it difficult to expand oil production as the U.S. was undergoing the worst energy crisis in its history. Okay? So we got this big shortage of energy. We need to expand oil production, which requires more steel, but the price of steel was being held down. So the producers of steel had no incentive to produce the extra steel. That doesn't happen if you let prices go to their equilibrium level. All right, effects of price controls are restricted to one market, disappear over time, can spread to other markets without price controls. That's the right answer. C. They will spread to other markets that don't have controls. Rent control is a really good example of a price ceiling. Usually, there are a lot of different ways that rent control can be imposed, but usually it does begin with a price freeze, where the government says, you can't raise the price anymore. Okay? They may lower it at first, and then they say, well, it's frozen at that level. But then, as things change, they generally will allow the controlled rent to go up. What do you think the effects are going to be? And how does elasticity fit into that?
There's more people looking for the housing at the controlled price than the uncontrolled price.
That's
So
right.
there's going to be more demand, but with the inelastic supply.
You're going to have a quantity demand will be greater.
Yep.
Which supply curve is going to be more elastic? The short run supply curve or the long run supply curve? Will it make any difference of housing? If say this is the quantity of apartment housing in a certain area, let's say that the average rent is $2,000. Saw an interesting graph the other day of rents in San Francisco, and there were a lot of apartments that were more than $2,000 per month. Per month. Well, what if and let's say there are 300,000 units available, and now the government says that's ridiculous. We're going to impose a ceiling of $1,000. They do that today. It goes into effect tomorrow. How many units are going to be available tomorrow? What can landlords do? If you own an apartment complex, can you say, well, I'm just going to take my apartment and go somewhere else? No, once you build it, it's there. The short run supply curve is going to be very inelastic, right? And so if you got a demand curve here, you impose the ceiling, you're still going to have the same number of units available, but consumers want more now. Okay? Maybe just that, before when it was really expensive, you'd have 3, 4, 5 people sharing an apartment. But if it's only $1,000, then you're going to have fewer people sharing. Okay? The quantity demanded is going to go up. You're going to have a shortage that's going to happen immediately when these controls go into effect. But over time, what's going to happen?
Prices are going to vary. Yeah, there's going to be an adjustment.
Well, there will be adjustment. As soon as this happens, producers think, what can we do? How can we avoid this rent control? Okay? So they're going to start looking for ways to get around this restriction. Okay? And there are a lot of things that they can do. In the long run, well, we've already said that the quality tends to be reduced. So the landlord says, maintenance, forget it. You call you're living there, you call the landlord, you say, my plumbing is not working right. He laughs, fix it yourself. You say, look, come fix it or I'm going to leave. He says, great. You know how long it will take me to get another person? Minutes. When I was in Santa Monica looking for an apartment, you did not look at the newspaper. There was no Google. You didn't look at the newspaper because when you saw an apartment listed there, it would already be gone. Because there was such a shortage, it was hard to find available vacancies. So if you wanted to find a place to stay, you just drove around and you looked for a vacancy sign and you hoped that nobody else had seen it before you saw it. And you ran in and signed the contract. Not a very pleasant way to live. The long run supply curve is going to be much more elastic. Okay? Short run, very inelastic. In the long run, since they're not going to be doing maintenance, they're going to fall down. They're not going to last as long, and they're not going to be replaced. So a few years later, you may have only 200,000 units because as the old ones wore out, they did not get replaced. So you notice you start out with a shortage that will be relatively small, but over time, it's going to get bigger and bigger. Over time, the quality is going to get lower and lower. Rent control is one of the most interesting examples of the bad effects that come when you mess with the price mechanism. New York City is one of the places where rent control has been used most extensively. Can you guess what the motivation was for imposing rent control initially?
There's a homelessness issue.
That wasn't it. Rent control was imposed initially to protect returning soldiers during World War II. That's when they were imposed. It was a temporary measure, but in many parts of New York City, they're still in effect. So Milton Friedman said there's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. And the rent control is a great example of that. Anyway, we'll stop here and I will pass out the exams to those of you who are here. If you have any questions, send me an email. Okay. You don't get to keep the test, but you can look at it as long as you want, and you can take notes. Okay. You need to stay here as long as